All right then, folks, let's kickstart this evening with a brilliant session by our very distinguished and renowned speaker of tonight, Isha Inani. Isha is a seasoned product leader with experience in building and growing products and leading high-performing teams. She is currently working with Disney Plus Hotstar as the product director. Most recently, Isha was with Ola, where she built two new product lines, Ola Cars and Ola Electric, hitting 1 million DAUs within a month. Before Ola, she had dipped her toes in the digital advertising space by launching new display ad products for Amazon. Previous to that, she led new product initiatives for AWS in the US. Outside of big tech, Isha has also built and launched products in the fast-paced startups. A very warm welcome to you, Isha. We're thrilled to have you here with us tonight. Handing the session over to you now.
Thanks so much, Shama. Thanks for the very glowing introduction. All right, I'll just quickly take over the screen if that's okay.
Yep, you can share the screen now.
All right. Hi, everyone. Super excited to be here today and talk a little bit about whatever I've been able to learn in the past few years working as a product manager, a product director. I, of course, have prepared a full deck for you for us to go through today. But Shama would need your help in keeping this session as interactive as possible. So please do keep the Zoom chat and the LinkedIn threads as active as possible.
Absolutely, we'll do that.
Thank you. All right, I think starting off, just quickly telling you what the main agenda for our talk today going to be is a very simple 3-point agenda, right? Essentially, customer obsession, what it really means, why is it important, and really how can you practice it, right? So I like to keep it very basic, as you can also see through the slides. Before we really go deeper into every section, I do want to just quickly give you an overview of a little bit about myself. While Shama, of course, thanks for the glowing intro, but keeping it a little bit more real and focused on product, I'll just quickly tell you what all I've worked on. So I started my product management career with Oyo, where I led several 0 to 1 features for customer experience. I then moved on to Amazon Web Services, which was a hardware product management role, very different from what I'd done at Oyo, but also very interesting and a great learning opportunity. From there, I moved on to Amazon Ads, where my life was full of CTRs, impressions, ad campaigns, but also another great opportunity to understand where you have two sets of customers. One is the advertiser, of course, and the other one is the customers who are using the platform. So great way to understand how to balance your customer needs between two very different cohorts. From there, I moved to Ola, where I got to launch a bunch of 0 to 1 products again, including Ola Cars, Ola Electric, and things in Ola Mobility as well. And right now, I'm with Hotstar, of course, where I'm leading the onboarding and growth charter for our customers. One thing, though, I do like to talk about is that before all of my product management stints, I used to work as an oil field engineer. And this is really a picture of the place where I used to work and had to spend months together. So I'm also quite familiar with the engineering side, and I really appreciate the corporate work life and the AC that comes with it. Needless to say, this job was a great leadership experience, but it definitely permanently ruined a good cruise vacation for me. So I no longer want to go on cruise vacations. But yeah, apart from that, I'm always happy to give back to the community in whatever way I can. So here's my email and my LinkedIn. Please feel free to hit me up whenever you have any questions, or if you need any sort of mentoring for product management. I'd be happy to meet with you and help out in any way that I can. Great. So that was about me. I think I'd just quickly like to get a sense of who the audience is today. And while I know it's not possible to go one by one for everyone, instead, Shama, if you could help me just run a quick survey where I'd like people to just quickly tell me which bucket they belong to, whether they are already product managers or they're aspiring to get into product management, or they're just here to learn and listen in. I think that'll be really useful, and I can also then shape my talk accordingly.
Great. So audience, I request you all to post your comments in the chat window and let us know which industry you come from and how many years of experience you have. So Isha has an idea about who she's talking to here.
Yeah.
So giving you a few seconds here to post your comments in the chat window. While we have the comments there, Isha, tell us more about your experience at the cruise that you mentioned. I'm sure it's not cruise, but how was it there, practically being there and, just it must be hard, right? So so you were a product manager there, I believe.
No, that was before I became a product manager. So
Okay.
that I was an engineer there. So I think whenever as a product manager today, if I have any disagreement with my engineering team, I'm usually able to tell them that, hey, you know what, I used to be an engineer before. Maybe
Yeah,
not.
so I can relate to it better.
But I think apart from that, it was just really a very great leadership experience, because whenever you're in an isolated place like that and you have to make decisions, you really don't have anyone else to ask, right? All your managers, your leadership
Yeah.
team sitting back in the city. So you become more independent, and you really become very self-sufficient in a way that you start trusting your own gut, you start making the right decisions. So I think that really laid the foundation for decision making in my career, at least.
I think audience, I think there you go. You have a strong key takeaway from what she said right now. So put yourself out there and just go with the flow. So we have a few comments here in the chat window.
Just reading through. I think
Yeah.
oh, great. We actually have a lot of PMs here. I see consulting, I see program management as well. And oh, okay. We also have an industrial safety officer here. So they probably relate to my Schlumberger background a lot. Great. Okay. I think this helps. Thanks, folks, for putting in comments. This really helps in getting the right in knowing what all you represent. Okay, great. I think again, before going deeper into the session, just very quickly setting some ground rules. I do not want this to be a monologue, and I do not want you to look like the people here in the picture going to sleep. So please, please keep, as I said, please keep the chat super active. Let's keep so. Please keep that happy. Please keep that on. And the second thing is, of course, questions. As you think of any question, feel free to put it in the chat window. And I think Shama, I'm going to lean on you if you could just ask me to take a quick pause, and I can address that question then and there. There's really no need for folks to wait until the end of the session to ask their questions. All right, great. So with that, let's begin with the agenda. So the very first part, right, which is essentially customer obsession and what it means. So going into that, I think before the world had heard of the phrase customer obsession, I think how work was typically done was that teams would build a product, throw it over the wall to their sales team, and then just tell them for a way to figure out to sell it to the customers. I think how customer obsession, once it's in the picture, how it really flips this completely a 180 degree, is that everything which is your product experience, and including all the teams that you're building it with, from sales to marketing to support, everything that you build is always built around customer needs, right? And there's a very interesting phrase that that you might have heard, perhaps, is that you need to work backwards from your customer. And what that means is that you start with your customers' needs first and not your product idea. So instead of building a product first and then trying to fit it to what the customer wants, you instead listen what your customers want, revise your product ideas and proposals according to that until your customers get excited, and then finally build your product. Having said this, I'm just curious if anyone in the audience has examples to share of what they feel in their daily lives has been some of the most customer obsessed products that they interact with. Keep that coming in the chat. But yeah, I think while that happens, I'll also share a quick example where I've really seen customer obsession. Yeah, that's true, Rajat. Metaverse is there. But I think just curious if in your daily lives as product manager, you've seen any customer obsession in flesh happening for you. But I'll share a quick example, right? So I want all of you to look at the screen that I've just put up, the photo, and I just want to ask you that how many of you have seen this in the past, and how many of you have really felt like throwing your keyboard into the wall after multiple tries of setting a password that meets all of these rules? I'm sure I'm not the only one. And if you've felt this, then please just add a +1 and or raise your hand. I think this is really a very typical example of building the product first and then fitting it for the customer, right? I'm sure someone in the security team of this company would have come up with these rules purely based on what kind of passwords would be hardest to crack and most secure. So guess what? While that might work from a security perspective, but thanks to these rules as a customer, I personally either forget the password or I just end up setting the same complicated string as a password everywhere, which in fact makes me even more vulnerable to any cyber attacks. I loved the way I love the way how Slack solved this. I don't know if there's anyone in the audience that has interacted with that link, but Slack actually started something called a magic link, and they were the first ones to do this. Where imagine that in today's multi-device world, where you have the same apps across your desktop, your mobile phone, even your living room smart TVs, right? How do you avoid this problem of getting customers to add or enter the same complicated passwords and in fact even remember? So what Slack did was, well, they realized or found out what the customers want. They want security, yes, but they want it without having to remember all of these rules and do all of this complicated stuff on the left. So what they did was they built something called a magic link that you can probably see in the picture, which is nothing but really just a secure or a unique hyperlink that they send to your email. So you send it from your desktop, open it on your mobile phone, and voila, you're signed in with just one click, right? So while this might seem like a very small thing to do, it shows what customer obsession is, right? It could take any form, honestly. The way you build your features, the way you take feedback from customers, or even the way you sell your product to them. So once you enter the world of customer obsession and once you're customer obsessed, it will automatically permeate even the smallest of your decisions and the smallest of your features. So this was one example. I'm going to take a quick pause and see if anyone has questions.
Nothing yet, Isha.
Okay, great. Let's move on then. The second part, which is really fine. I mean, we've understood what customer obsession is, but why does it really matter and how can it help my org or my team, right? I think at the end of the day, any product has three core metrics, right? Either you want to acquire, how easily you're able to acquire customers. Second is how easily are you able to retain your customers. And thirdly is how easily are you able to engage with your customers and set yourself apart from the competition. Luckily, customer obsession, I feel, is something that affects all three parameters and helps you do better for your customers on all three, right? The first one, which is easier acquisition, which is really, if you are customer obsessed, is really one of the simplest ways to ensure that your customers will choose you over your competition. It helps you be a unique differentiator. And to give you an example, I'll say Zoom and Skype. So these are both apps that are meant for video calling. And at the risk of sounding a little old, I don't know if any of you have used Skype before, but you'll realize why it lost out to Zoom in the race, right? Today, if you want to download Zoom, it is super easy. Installing it is quite painless, and getting people into a meeting is as simple as sending a link, right? So using Zoom is in fact super bug free, which is not what I can say for Skype. So just by simply listening to the customers and building very basic functionalities for them, which was really easy installation, easy sharing of meetings, and making it a bug-free experience. That is all that Zoom had to do, which automatically made people give up on Skype and so easily move to Zoom. I do not think Zoom had to run any special marketing campaigns or acquisition strategies. I think they were able to get customers on simply by the virtue of their product. The second piece that I said, which is why I think customer obsession is important, is really easier retention. It ensures that your customers, while you might have acquired them because of good, good product thinking and uh, great features, it's also something that helps you retain them because you're giving them good customer satisfaction. Anyone who would like to share examples of where they've seen that they were loyal customers to a product because it was really listening to what they wanted as customers? Okay, if not, I'll give you one. Uh, and this might be a little controversial. Oh, hold on. We have one, Zomato versus Swiggy. Do you want to tell us which one you found better for retention? I think that's Sumanas. Shama, maybe you could unmute her or him.
No, I don't see any raised hands yet.
Oh, okay, great. Yeah, I think then that's what I would love to know, which one you think has better retention. But okay. So
we also have a question, Isha, from Rajat. How
Mhm.
important will you say is it to track metrics like acquisition rate and retention?
I would say, I mean, it's pretty important. Metrics is really one of the key things that you would track as a product manager. But would love to hear more, Rajat, on whether you're trying to ask whether one is important over the other or both.
Rajat, you can always come online and ask your question. You just have to raise your hand and I can unmute you. It goes the same for everybody here. If you have any questions for Isha, you can raise your hand. I can mute you and you can ask a question live to the speaker. You can continue.
Okay, I'll continue then. Yeah, so my example is actually Uber and Ola. And I know I used to work for Ola before, but I'm brutally honest about what works and what doesn't, right? I also know we have a few Ola folks in the audience, but I'm sure that you'll agree with me when I say that thanks to Uber's product, driver quality and customer satisfaction, despite there sometimes being a fair difference with Ola usually being the cheaper one, I found that people always choose Uber. And once again, this is a very good example of customer obsession, because at the end of the day, what is it that your customer wants from a ride hailing company? They want a safe car, they want a good driver, and they want a reasonable fare to get from one place to another. So if you can meet all of that along with providing superior customer service, then why would your customers leave you? So this is really where retention plays in as a big lever, where if you're customer obsessed and you are able to provide that level of customer satisfaction, it is not only easy to acquire, but it's also easy to retain your customers. The third one, I think that's important, that's the biggest, I would say, impact lever that customer obsession brings in, is how it makes it easier for you to stay in the game, right? Which basically means that you're able to, because you're listening to your customers, you're able to anticipate what they want instead of playing catch up with what they need. And you're usually you're usually charting newer paths for your customers instead of just meeting with what your competition does, right? Any examples here? Please, again, feel free to put it in the chat.
We have two raised hands. Allow me to unmute them, Isha, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Rajat, you can go ahead and ask your question now.
Yeah, thanks a lot for the opportunity. So my question is more regarding the metrics basis. There's a new product and it does not have any metrics yet. So we have not defined any metrics, or let's say there are not a single metric defined. Yeah. So let's say what are some of the factors, or what are some of the metrics that you will say definitely we should track? Or should we wait for the product to evolve more, or should we wait to get more customers? How would you go about that?
Interesting question, Rajat. I think, sorry, I usually hate when I get this answer, but I'm sorry, I'll have to say that it depends.
Okay.
I think it really depends on what your end goal is with the product, right? Do you want to make money? I'm talking very crudely here. Do you want to make money? Do you want to simply grow at this stage? Do you want to, it could also be an end of the life product and you probably want to phase it out of your customers' lives, right? So it depends. I think your product metrics at the end of the day are derived from what the business wants or what your business goal is with the product. And
let's
then
say we are chasing profitability, money itself.
okay.
Yeah,
So in
sorry
that
for
case,
following up like that. I know it
sure.
will become too long if we keep following like that. Sorry.
No, that's fine. Don't worry. So I think,
Sure.
okay, let's say that your core business goal is profitability. Then that's an easy one because you know what affects profitability. Either you want more, so you get more customers, so you increase top of the funnel, that's actually the same three things that are on the screen. Either you get more customers or you retain the customers who are already there so that they keep using your service or your product and paying you. Or thirdly, you for the customers who are already on your product or platform, you simply increase the transactions or the engagement that they bring with them, right? So you choose either one, whatever, and whichever one works, you automatically derive your output metrics from there. So for example, say you realize that the more people you get on your platform, the better it is, then you start focusing on output metrics there. You start looking at funnels, you start looking at how many people come to your product, what is the drop off point like, what is the biggest, I'd say, churn factor for your customer to drop off. So yeah, it's not a very straightforward answer, unfortunately.
No, of course, but it depends on many things, and there are a lot of follow-up questions. But for the purpose of this webinar, I'll now keep quiet because again there will be too many questions and it'll become longer. All right, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for the answer.
Okay, was there another question, Shama?
I don't see the raised hand now, so you can continue. We can take the question a little later.
Okay, sure. I think, yeah, so the example that I like to usually go back to is, of course, Amazon and Walmart here for the third one, which is how you how you create new paths for your customers. So I don't know if anyone remembers the days when it was totally normal to receive a courier or a shipping package in 7 days. I remember that time. And if at that point in time where Amazon and Walmart both existed, and if Amazon had benchmarked itself against that, or its biggest competitor, Walmart, then we would have never gotten 2-day deliveries. I think it was because Amazon was highly customer obsessed. They would have probably listened to their customers and realized that we can do better. And thanks to that, we now have 2-day deliveries and in fact, hyper delivery, which is actually 15 minutes today. Yeah. So moving on to the next one, which I personally think is probably the best, might be the best takeaway from this session, because the first two are some things that you would have probably experienced in your respective organizations as well. I think there are a few tools and strategies that I have learned in my past organizations, which I found to be very effective in building a very customer obsessed culture. And I'll take each one and we'll go further in detail. But please, again, use this section to ask as many questions as you want, because I think this is really something that I have benefited a lot from. And if you have any doubts as to how it worked, why it worked, please, now would be a good time to ask that. Okay, taking the first one, which is PRFAQs, which is actually an Amazon thing, something that I learned at Amazon, where instead of writing PRDs or product requirement documents, we used to write what Amazon calls PRFAQs, or press release and FAQs. A PRFAQ is essentially, it has 3 sections, right? It has a press release, which is really a hypothetical future note of sorts, where you might write a press release for a product which will get released much later, but you write a press release now. And it is like a litmus test for you, where if that particular press release doesn't excite you or any of your stakeholders to buy or use the product, then it probably needs to be rewritten, or you need to revisit your product idea or specs itself, right? The next section, which is the external FAQ section, it's really a list of potential questions that your customers or the press might have for you about the product, right? It has, of course, along with the relevant answers against each question, where you can expect to put in questions like, what would be the price of the product? Where will it be available? When can I start using it? How will it benefit me as a customer? These questions, which a typical customer would have in their mind once you introduce them to your product, are what go into this external FAQ section. The third section, which is the internal FAQ section, is, I think, really where a lot of the product specs meet is. It's similar to external FAQ, but much longer, with very hard questions that your internal stakeholders might have for you, for the product development team. So it'll include all kinds of concerns, challenges, GTM questions, potential risks that your product might have. And it might also even have mock-ups or designs if your product requires it. So essentially, with these three sections, a typical PR FAQ, hey Rajat, just saw your question. GTM questions, how do you want to go to market? Sorry, GTM stands for go to market. So how do you want to launch your product or roll out your product to your customers? So yeah, a typical PR FAQ should not, and in fact, we had a strict rule at Amazon that it should not exceed 6 pages, right? The idea is that if you're not able to convey your product offering within 6 pages, then you probably need to break it down into further sub-products and write it as separate documents. As PMs at Amazon, we would spend at least a few months doing our customer research, talking to all possible stakeholders, and drafting one PR FAQ, which is 1 6-pager for a review. And then after 3 months, we would finally present it for review with the relevant stakeholders in the room. And remember, the product hasn't been built yet, right? This is actually the first step of starting any product development. In that meeting, it's a 1-hour meeting. First 20 minutes, everyone is just simply silently reading that PR FAQ. And the next 40 minutes are spent with intense debate and discussions over that PR FAQ. If at the end of that session, all the stakeholders align on what you have proposed in the document, then you start with the product development. So I'll just quickly show you a very, of course, I couldn't show you an Amazon PR FAQ because of confidentiality reasons, but this is one small example or excerpt I found online of a PR FAQ, where you can see that the first part of the document is really a very hypothetical press release. It'll have there's a product for I think it's a job search software suite, where the press release in fact almost starts as that today we have launched XYZ product, where we have formally announced it. It also has customer quotes where customers are talking about the pain they had before this product was launched and how it has solved and improved their lives now that the product is with them. And then finally, there's the next section, which has internal FAQs, and the section after that would be the external FAQs. So one tool that I have found super useful before I start thinking about building any product, and it doesn't have to be a product, it can also be a feature, which is much smaller. And this really helps you, almost forces you to think from your customer's point of view, rather than building something first and then trying to sell it to the customer. All right. I see a few questions in the chat, Shrama, but if there are no raised hands, we can move on.
We can move on. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Isha, there's one question in the Q&A window.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not quite sure if you've already answered that while you were explaining the PR FAQ, but the question is the purpose of the PR FAQ to build an initial vision for the product, keeping the customer in mind?
Yeah, sure. Yes, that is one part of it, but the PR FAQ is really just, it's a Bible of the product. It has everything. It has the vision, it has the specs, it has your designs, your mocks, it has your go-to-market strategy, your pricing plans, or even if there are any technical specifications that you need, it has that too. So it's actually a little bit difficult often to fit it into 6 pages, which is why we also add an appendix where some of the detailed studies, detailed interviews, business cases can go in, and the core of the document still says 6 pages, stays as 6 pages.
We have one more question in the chat window from Srishti. What are your thoughts on spending, say, 3 months ideating on the perfect product, then additional time on building versus launching a basic bare minimum, yet workable product and using feedback to iterate quickly?
Yeah, that's a great question, Srishti. I think uh, so. Working in an agile methodology is important, absolutely. And writing a PRFAQ really doesn't have to be doesn't have to be a waterfall model where you're spending. So it's not a one after the other thing. From a timeline perspective, if I were to tell you, for a product that I'm going to launch in, say 3 months later, I would have already had the PRD ready today, right? And it is more important for you to get the initial thought process right, rather than start with something a little bit cloudy and hazy and then iterate on it. So the PRFAQ is a guideline at the end of the day. It's not something that's set in stone. So sure, maybe after you've launched the product, some of the things that you'd estimated might not have turned out the way you thought they would, and it's completely fine to iterate on the product based on your customers' feedback. But having that clear articulation of what you want to build and why is what the PRFAQ forces you to do, which I think is still a very, very good exercise to do. And while Amazon took 3 months or so, it when I started doing this at other organizations, which could move much faster, I have done PRFAQs in 2 weeks, 3 weeks as well. So it really depends on the pace of your organization and your product. But I think it's still a very good first step to start, where you identify the problem statement first and then use that as a guideline to iterate forward.
So the follow-up question is, does PRFAQ highlight the MVP or lays out the end goal vision?
Yeah, I think that's related to the first one, Srishti. It depends. Again, it's what you want and what you define as the product manager. So I think you could choose to have several PRFAQs where your very first PRFAQ talks about the MVP you'd like to launch. And then you could follow it up with another PRFAQ that has all the bells and whistles with it, right? But if your MVP itself, and I'll tell you, this is where the press release helps, right? Say your MVP, to build your MVP, you had to cut down so much that your press release at the end of the day, if someone reads it and they are not even the least bit excited by what you're proposing to offer, then that probably means that you've cut too much, and you should revisit and see if you need to add features back in for your product to be not just MVP, but what we call MLP, or minimum lovable product. Okay, what's the difference between product documentation and PRFAQ? Rajat, I think different companies have different phrasings for these, but product documentation, I've typically seen companies use it to define the technical specs of the product as to what the system architecture should be, what kind of latency, performance, and what kind of user flows need to exist. Whereas PRFAQ not only includes that, but has the broader product vision, as well as other decisions around the product like pricing, GTM, etc., which your product documentation might not have. But as I said, it's a completely phrasing game. It's possible that at your company, product documentation probably means what I am calling as a PRFAQ. All right, cool. Let's move to the next one, which is voice of customer. And actually, I should have probably put this slide before PRFAQ, but I think the very first step to customer obsession is listening to your customer, right? If you're not talking to them, if you're not listening to them, then you won't know what to build for them. I think, and there are a few things that I would like to recommend to all of you so that you can make this a part of your everyday work life, right? The first one that I learned and actually experienced at Oyo was to listen in on customer calls, customer feedback calls. So your customer support center is like a live vein of super useful customer feedback. And at Oyo, like I was telling you, which is where I learned this from, was that we had a bunch of parallel phones within the office, which were directly connected to our support center. And so that anyone in the office walking past these phones could just pick up the phone and shadow any customer feedback call that was going on at that time, right? And that in itself was such a valuable source of information and feedback for us that I actually then ended up making it a mandatory exercise for all our product managers, right? And then if you do not have a direct to customer product, it's okay. You probably don't have, incoming calls from customers all the time. It is completely okay to schedule direct one-on-one customer interviews as well, which is something that I did at Amazon advertising, where advertisers were my customers there, right? And they're usually not the ones calling every day all the time with any complaints, etc. So I would actually have one interview with an advertiser at least one per week, where I would ask them very pointed questions on how they were feeling about our new products or some of the older products and how we could improve them. So this is one practice that now I've liked to continue at other organizations as well. And the second thing that I like to do is, something called spend a day in the life of your customer. So customer obsession is not just imagining walking in the shoes of your customer. It is in fact, really experiencing product from their point of view. And in product jargon, it is often called eating your own dog food, which I think some of you might have also used at your organizations. And this is something that actually I've experienced in all my past companies, that all the past customer obsessed companies that I've been a part of. At Oyo, our onboarding included staying at one of the nearby Oyo properties for at least one night. At AWS, my very first day was spent at a data center nearby from morning to evening, understanding the intricacies and workings of it. At Ola, we try to take, Ola rides at least once every week, where we could converse with the driver and see how it would feel as a rider. And you'd be surprised by the kind of insights that you and your team are able to gather from such a simple activity as just eating your own dog food. The third thing would be ensuring, as product managers, how you're able to propagate this voice of your customers across all teams. I think in the room, I typically like to say the role of the product manager in a room with all other stakeholders is to be the sole fighter for the customer, right? Everyone else has their own goals. Your tech counterparts will have their own timelines to meet. Your strategy and business counterparts will always have their own business numbers to meet. And if there is one voice in the room that represents the customer, it is the product manager. So it also becomes our responsibility, I feel, to make sure that the voice of the customer propagates across all other teams, right? And I can share examples where at Amazon, there have been meetings where I actually played actual real customer call recordings to drive home my point as to why we should build a certain product or a feature. And just data aside and my business case aside, just playing that one call in the meeting got me immediate buy-in from my tech and my business stakeholders. So when people actually really hear the customer pain, they automatically understand the importance of what we're building and why. And it's then easier to have everyone on the same page and build the right kind of product. Okay, I think there's a question from Rajat. Sometimes customers have too many feature requests. How do you understand what to work on and what to postpone? Sure. Great question. I think, Rajat, again, I think a lot of your questions I have to unfortunately say it depends, but it really is a mix of qualitative and quantitative analyses, right? So at the end of the day, while voice of customer is your is a qualitative lens on what's really happening with your customers, at the end of the day, you want to base it with data and understand really how big of a problem is this, what is the impact, potential impact you might have if you were to solve this problem. And I think that automatically makes it very easy for you to make a call whether this should be fixed now versus later, right? And that actually is a great segue into the next tool, which I think is important. that is making insights-based decisions, or essentially using experiments and data to decide what's right for your customer. I think before I go deeper into that, though, there's a question from Atul. How do we do customer calls in such a way that we derive maximum insights out of it? Like, what questions do we ask and how to go about it, provided that users are from a tier 2 or 3 city? Okay. I think, Atul, one important thing to whenever you're going into these calls. So of course, one way is to listen in on calls, and you can actually really leverage your customer support team here, where they can send specific collections of calls to you, right? So like I remember at Oyo, because I was working on the personalization of the app. I'd asked the customer support agents to only send me calls that belong to a specific category, right? Which was, for example, like complaint about room quality, right? And that really narrowed down the kind of feedback I was listening to, which was more relevant to my product charter. But don't limit yourself to that. I would also say that if possible in your company, you should actually reach out to these customers directly and have focus group research, focused researches, as well as interviews with them. And I'll tell you a quick example from Hotstar, where right now we're launching in a few international countries, and purely because I decided to be on one of the research calls where our research UX team was talking to folks from the international country that we're going to launch in. I realized that one of our screens said, after entering your mobile number, please enter the OTP that you get. And that customer was like, what does OTP mean? And that call itself, or that statement itself, was a great wake up call for me to understand that how much we will have to how we'll have to revisit our entire product from a lens that we're not just building for India, we're actually building internationally. And even a small thing like OTP is probably something that is not very globally recognized. So we'll have to keep that lens on. So I think my point from this example is that even if you are able to be a part of such research calls, you'll be able to uncover insights that otherwise you might not have known just purely from data. So try to either see if you can narrow down your customer support calls, the ones that you get from your support center, or try to have direct interview calls with your customers. All right, moving to this one, which is how do I move on from qualitative to quantitative, right? So while the voice of customer will give you qualitative feedback, you still always need to support it with quantitative data. And like, for example, one of your customers might have said that the app is too slow for them. But is this really something that all your customers are facing, or is it a specific cohort? This is where data comes into the picture, and you then make priority calls based on what data tells you. So voice of customer might trigger this data exercise, but at the end of the day, it's data that tells you what should be built versus what shouldn't. I think the other thing that also that's also a result of this is that looking at data with this customer obsession lens also gives you a very good view on what's good in the what's important in the short term versus long term, right? So what might seem like a bad idea in the short term might actually be good for you in the long term, or vice versa. And the example that I like to give here is of Amazon Prime, which is basically the Prime membership that Amazon has. And when initially Amazon had started its Prime program, it offered discounts on the products it sold, right? So what happened is that because of that, in the short term, the average revenue per customer obviously fell because they were signing up through Prime memberships. Fortunately, they ran an A/B test where, apart from looking at just the immediate revenue per user because of the Prime program, they also looked at the lifetime value that every Prime customer was bringing in. And obviously, Prime customers end up buying more throughout the year. They end up coming back to Amazon more often because of good discounts and faster shipping, which led to an overall increase in the lifetime value of that customer. So I always like to think back to this example, because I think that, imagine something so important as Amazon Prime would not have launched had the product manager not decided to not run an A/B test and not have that long-term insights lens with it. So always have um, qualitative data to start you off, but always rely on the quantitative data to actually tell you what should be done. Yeah, I think, Puneet, that's a great point. All right, the last tool, and I'm just going to quickly look at the time. I think we're actually a little bit late, so I'll quickly gloss over this. It's the last one, but it's definitely not the least important, which is your customer support center. It's not a very glorified product area, but you'll be amazed by how much it affects your customer retention, right? And just think about it. If I asked you to return an order online versus if I asked you to, say, cancel a flight with a flight partner, tell me honestly, which decision or which action gives you more anxiety? I think personally, for me, it would be canceling a flight. And in fact, you could actually replace this guy in the picture with a picture of me trying to reschedule or cancel a flight, because that's how terrible the experience is. And that really tells you how important customer support is for your product, because if the one place where your customers are using to talk back to you, if you're not able to give them a good experience there, then really that's not how customer obsession starts, right? One thing that or actually couple of things that I like to ensure whenever I'm looking at customer support as an org, right? I think first is that you should never let your customer support section be just an ops team. It has to be a dedicated product charter. It has to have a dedicated product team building roadmaps for it, because otherwise you will never be able to improve it in the way that your customers come back to you because of this, right? The second one, I think, is really knowing how to support your customers, when to support your customers using product versus having a real person talking to them, right? It is very tempting to handle most queries through chatbots and automated calls, but if that leads to 40-minute waits or unfulfilled complaints, then maybe you need to rethink your strategy. So quick example I can share from Ola is that during last year's terrible COVID wave, I had launched a quick product at Ola to deliver oxygen concentrators to the people in need. Because we had to launch it so quickly, it was very tempting for me to handle all the product queries that we might get, or all the customer queries that we might get through the product itself. But given the sensitive nature of that situation, I deliberately chose to remove all product-based support and instead have real people manning the telephone lines. Because knowing when to use product versus tech on your customer support is a very important make or break decision that you can make. But yeah, I think quick summary, these are some of the tools that I have found super useful in my past stints, and I hope you can use some of these in your current roles to be more customer obsessed. And yeah, just in interest of time, going to quickly take a pause and see if folks have questions.
Thank you for delivering a brilliant session, Isha. Really great and thought-provoking insights, and I'm sure the audience agrees with that. So audience, here is your last chance to ask any questions you may have. Please post your questions in the Q&A section, or just simply raise your hand and we can unmute you. Okay, so Isha, we have one raised hand. Nisha Seni, please go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah, thanks, Shama. First of all, Isha, thank you so much for such a brilliant session. My question is, somewhere in your session towards the end, you mentioned that in a product manager is, when they're sitting with their business team and technical team and marketing team, you are probably the only person who is advocating the end user interest. Uh, uh, and in situations like those, often product manager faces difficulty in convincing, say, the business or other teams as to what vision a product manager is holding. Did you ever face any conflict of interest, which I'm guessing you must have? How did you really navigate scenarios of those kind? How do you really convince other teams uh, about the vision that you hold?
Yeah, sure. Great question. I think, and we've probably all faced something like this in our careers in the past, right? There will always be conflicting goals between teams, and given that product management is such a cross-functional role, that is bound to happen, and usually falls on the PM to convince everyone else. I have a very 3-point strategy in mind for such situations. The first one is really to go with data, right? Data is your best friend in such situations. If numbers can tell everyone that this is a real customer pain, this is, if you build XYZ feature or product, this is how much it will solve that pain, or this is how much money it will bring in, or this is how much engagement or any other metric for that matter that's important for you, that's how much it will increase, then it's a very easy discussion to have. If that doesn't work, then, as I said, I've actually used real customer feedback in meetings, where I've played customer calls in the meeting for everyone else, so that they could really hear the pain that our customer was feeling. And that that was a very easy win for me to convince everyone else. And I think just a third thing that is more of a, I'd say, a relationship management tactic that I use is that usually before these meetings, what I like to do is have a smaller meetup with a few, like 1 or 2 people who would be eventually in that meeting, and I like to sort of make them advocates for my decision and my idea, so that whenever the bigger meeting happens, it's not just me fighting the battles alone, right? I have other advocates with me who are convinced of my point of view and are helping me convince others as well.
Right. Thanks, Isha. Thanks for that.
We have another question in the Q&A window.
Mm-hmm.
How do we classify if the feedback from the customer is genuine, or is it out of emotion?
Yeah, I think great question. And just going back to what I said earlier, probably repeating myself, but to understand what is genuine and not, again, it's going to be data that tells you. So if a lot of customers are voicing the same concern, then it is probably a genuine thing, right? However, if there's a one odd customer who has probably told you or voiced a complaint which hasn't been faced by as many people or hasn't really repeated that much, it's usually easier to then call it as a non-genuine complaint. But yeah, it's a data game at the end of the day.
There's this question from Vinay. You have got a variety, background, and credentials. When making decisions on product, PM is usually supposed to rely on expert opinion and drive through uncertain zone. How do you stir through in such situations?
So is the question about how do I handle uncertainties in daily product decisions?
I believe so. That's the question.
Yeah, I think a very complicated question, actually. So I would say a little bit of it comes with experience, and a lot of it really is your teams and your processes helping you out, right? Whenever you have to make a decision where you don't have all the data that you need, it's good to understand what are some decisions that you can go back on and what are some decisions that are irreversible. So the ones that you can go back on, you should just move ahead and just trust your gut and move ahead. But if it's a decision that you can't go back on, then I would highly recommend that you take your time, talk to all other stakeholders or people who can help you with making that decision, and then move forward. So I think it's really just if you're in an uncertain situation, always ask yourself, is this decision something that I can go back on, or is this a one-way door? And based on that, you choose your speed of decision making as well as quality.
If we give it the limited time, Isha will take this one last question from Aditya, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Aditya, go ahead and ask your question.
Actually, it's not a question, rather than it's an experience which I want to share, if that's okay, or else I can actually wait for someone can ask a question.
I think, what do you say, Isha? Take the call. We have a lot of questions actually lined up.
Yeah, let's go with the question than
Yeah.
the experience part. Yeah, thanks.
All right, Aditya, thank you. Lovish, you can ask your question now.
Thanks. Hi, Isha. Thanks for the wonderful session. My question comes from a very naive or a noob point of view, I would say. As someone who's been now tasked to, build a strategy for a 0 to 1 product, how does that relationship work with the strategist working with the product manager, and what things should I look forward to or keep in mind before taking or stepping into that role, sort of?
So just to clarify, Lovish, you are a part of the business team, and you are basically understanding how to work with the product counterparts. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah, I think from my experience in building 0 to 1 products, I've realized that from a business side, it is because this is a 0 to 1 product, you really want to be as nimble as possible, because you don't know how your product will shape out eventually when it's in the 1 to 10 kind of a scale, right? I mean, you of course have smart estimations, but you want to be nimble to be able to pivot your strategy as easily as possible. Having said that, what that means is that I would recommend that your initial phase, you should keep you should rely lower on building tech products, and maybe initially rely more heavily on using manpower or operations teams to understand initial customer feedback. So, like, for example, to give an example, when we were building Ola cards, we deliberately chose to keep it more operations heavy rather than going ahead and building a great product for it on or a standalone app for it. It's in the first go itself, right? So as a business counterpart, I think it's good to have that lens and that understanding that you shouldn't push your product and tech teams to build the Taj Mahal for you right away. Right. It's good to start slow, keep it ops heavy, and then as you get more clarity on what your customers are actually looking for and what works for your company, that's when then you should eventually move your balance more into tech and product.
I do have a follow-up question, but that I put that in the Q&A session as well. We're a very small team that's trying to build something here. So how do we as a small team make up for a lack of that customer support that might be missing initially, that vast manpower, like you said?
Yeah, actually, I would say that might work more in your favor, Lovish, because in the past, like some of the bigger organizations I've seen, but you actually can't talk to your customers directly because there's all of this confidentiality and so many hurdles and hoops to jump through. So as a small and a quick organization, I think you actually have the liberty to go and even meet with your customers in person if you want, and get real first-hand feedback. There's nothing that could replace that. So yes, you might not get that kind of a volume of feedback, but the quality would be super, super high. And I think as you grow, you can then of course look at even hiring external agencies to do a quick market research or a feedback exercise for you over your customers. That's always an option.
Thanks.
All right.
Yes, in view of the time constraints, we will have to end the Q&A here. Thanks for the participation, audience, and the amazing questions. So before we conclude, we have a task for you here, Isha. Please select the champion of curiosity. We will reward them with a free digital course as promised at the start of the session. So I hope you remember some good questions that we took, and we can declare the champion. You can have a look at them in the Q&A window or the chat window.
Yeah, I think Rajat Kumar Gupta, for that matter, had a lot of questions which were which really demonstrated his overly cute nature. So I would definitely nominate him for this. I think he had some great questions and helped me segue into the right sections in my presentation as well.
Great. Congratulations, Rajat, on winning the free digital course. We'll get in touch with you with the reward shortly.
But yeah, thanks for the opportunity, Shama, and thanks everyone for
Yes, we have enjoyed having you with us, Isha, over here, and it's been a complete pleasure. Please accept the certificate of appreciation from the Institute. So if you scan the QR code on the certificate, it'll take you to a dedicated Hall of Fame page that we have created for you, which holds the recording of this session. Just give it a few hours, so we upload it. We'll be sharing this webinar on our YouTube channel as well. And thank you so much for your time and effort. It was great having you here.
Yeah, same. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity.
And audience, thank you for joining in. But before we go away, this is your next webinar in line on the 31st of March, building an actionable product strategy. So check out the link in the chat window and register for this event. Thank you for joining in. It's been great interacting with you all. And I'll see you on 31st next. Happy learning and stay skilled. Have a great night.